So in December 2021, I believe, on the 25th anniversary of CSS, I organized a little online game show. I reached out to the incredible people over at Oddbird. I also had Lynn Fisher as a guest, and we basically had a little game show. So we had 25 questions about CSS and, little trivia basically. But the 25th question was the special one, the one that probably brought you here. So the question was, which was the first browser to implement CSS? And like it happened back then in 2021, and it happened this week, June 2023, people selected, what was it? I think most people said Netscape Navigator. Valiant effort, but the correct answer was Internet Explorer. That is correct. Internet Explorer was the first browser to support CSS. During the game show, well, he wasn't seen then, but I did have a special guest who was in the audience, and that guest was Chris Wilson, the engineer responsible for adding support to Internet Explorer for CSS. So, we had met a couple of years prior. I thought it'd be really interesting for him to sort of drop by and share some of the backstories about the implementation of CSS into Internet Explorer. So here to talk about that very topic, Chris Wilson, who was generous enough to give us a bit of his time and to share some of this history. Enjoy. Last question. Which browser was the first to support CSS? I mean, this is for all the marbles and the t-shirt.
Mostly the t-shirt.
Yeah. Ooh.
You got him.
I got him. I got him. They're like holding their leg. They're like, I didn't see that trap.
I want to say that's the only one that wasn't my question. So if you're mad.
What? I mean, wow. Oof. Whelp. Rip. What was Netscape Navigator? It worked. The trap worked. This was super interesting, actually. And yes, that was my question. Thank you very much.
Netscape came out pushing font and center and all those descriptive tags in HTML. Those came from Netscape.
I mean, a lot of stuff came from Netscape, actually, but not CSS support, or at least not right away.
Not initially.
And I thought that was interesting when I found out about it some time back, and I was like, this is actually kind of cool. And again, it's about these things where these decisions were like conversations. It's like, oh, you got time for this? Yeah, I do. Okay, go ahead. Get that done, whatever. And next thing you know, it's like, it seems sort of like insignificant, but really it is kind of like a big deal. And, back to the last question that most of you did not get. It's funny because a while back, I'd listened to a podcast that I'm a huge fan of. It's another podcast called the History of the Internet podcast. And I remember hearing about it and thinking like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And not only did I listen to the engineer talking about it, I remember meeting him a few years ago, and because, he had been involved in not only the decision-making over at IE, but he had come from the early days of browsers and the web, starting from like Mosaic. And I thought it was amazing to hear those stories told by some of the engineers who were there. And some are kind of still around, others aren't. They've gone on and, become, I don't know, teachers. I don't know, just chilled. But, here to talk about the story of Internet Explorer being the first browser to support CSS is Mr. Chris Wilson, who was the actual engineer responsible for that decision. So, Mr. Wilson, is your mic on?
I think so. It's kind of funny. So first of all, I got to say, I'm very disappointed in 9 of you. Just lead with that. But moving on, it's interesting. Whoever said that Netscape was first out with font and center and a bunch of stuff like that is right on point. Like they actually they did some features like that. And when we were looking around after we'd shipped IE 2.0, I hadn't been on the team at Internet Explorer that long. My manager like came into my office and said, "Hey, we think we're going to have you implement frame sets." And I was like, "Oh, that'd be great. We should totally do that." But there's this feature called CSS that Netscape's not even looking at yet, and it'd be so cool. We could beat them with a punch. We could do all this stuff. Bert and Hauken at the W3C had been like doing the design work, but not really implementing it. And that's how I ended up spending most of the IE3 cycle implementing basic CSS and shipping it. And that kind of pushed Netscape's hand to start implementing it after that. Although they really didn't get to do a great job until they moved to the Mozilla engine, which was kind of after the Netscape days. They still had a really static engine. Like you couldn't resize the window. If you resized the window in Netscape, it would actually go reload the page. In fact, it would reload the page from the network in early versions. So like if you just dragged the window a little narrower, it would go reload it. And I had come up, even at NCSA, I'd done this super dynamic thing that was probably wildly over-engineered so that I could, dynamically resize the window and relay out. So it was kind of helpful.
Wow. So, getting back to even so for those who don't know, Mr. Wilson was involved over at NCSA, the National Supercomputing Application. Is that what it stood for?
National Center for Supercomputing Applications. I have to think about it when I say it every time. So.
Yeah, I always forget the C part. Yeah, exactly. So you were essentially part of the Mosaic team.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you skipped? Go ahead.
I co-wrote the Windows version of Mosaic with a friend of mine, John Mittelhauser. And then I left and went off to a different company in Seattle, was still working on a browser for a company called Spry for about a year and a half. And then I went to Microsoft after that. But right after I left, John and the rest of the core Mosaic engine team got poached away by Mark Andreessen for Netscape, basically, to go found Netscape and run it. And I had already planned to move to Seattle and kind of wanted to stay on that plan. So I didn't end up going there. Kind of wanted some new opportunities at the time. So kind of went there and then went over to Microsoft and joined IE right before we shipped IE 2.0. I did one check-in in IE 2.0 and then was there for 15 years, almost entirely on IE. And then went to Google about 11 years ago, and I'm the web standards tech lead on Chrome. So I do mostly high-level standards work, like more, I don't know. I shuddered once to accidentally describe myself as a standards politician, but it's probably the best description, unfortunately.
Miriam's works in standards as well at the W3C, so I'm sure she can appreciate, a lot of the work that you do. And yeah, because I couldn't remember if you had skipped the whole Netscape transition to before IE or not, but obviously you confirmed that. And any sort of like wild stories of when IE shipped CSS and some of your former buddies at Netscape, were they like mad?
No, it was like for a number of years, I'd say until IE 4.0, we were fairly evenly matched. Like we had some features they didn't. They definitely had some features that we didn't. They were definitely in the lead for a bit. And what actually happened in the IE4 cycle was, it's kind of funny. In the end of IE3, I'd been working on CSS, right? And everyone knew we were going to ship it. We'd already been shipping betas. And we heard this rumor that there was another group inside Microsoft that was building a rendering engine for the web. And this guy that I worked with really closely, who sat right next to me, he went over to a meeting with this team to discover what they'd done. And he comes back and he's like really disappointed, like really sad looking. He comes into my office, he shuts the door and he's like, we're screwed. We're out of a job. Like they do everything. They have this massive dynamic editing capable system. And, you can literally like just start typing in the middle of a web page and it reformats as you go, and stuff that we couldn't really even dream of doing. Dynamically change any of the attributes programmatically and all this cool stuff. And the funny part was he was kind of right, because that engine was Trident, right? It was actually developed originally as the Forms Cubed engine at Microsoft in a totally different team than the Internet Explorer team. And we moved it in to replace the rendering engine in the IE4 cycle. And I was the only member of the rendering engine team that got moved to the Trident team. And it was because I had implemented CSS and they had no idea how to do CSS. Like they had no concept of it. It was really like, it kind of didn't work with the way that they had implemented some of their code. So I had to do some delicate dancing to get it to work again. But I remember after that, like when it was clear they were going to replace us in the next version, they had me come over and give a demo to their entire team of what I'd implemented for CSS, like what CSS was capable of. So, I built a bunch of demos of the best I could do at the time, which was, like negative margin overlapping and stuff like that, and color and font control and all that kind of thing. And I went over and started demoing all this to them, got through all my demos, and I was like, and we're shipping in like a month, and I'm hoping to get these 3 other features done by the end. And they're like, well, could you not? Because anything you do, we have to implement 2 before we can ship. So we'd rather you not add more features. And I was like, screw you guys. I'm implementing 5 features before we ship now. And pretty much did. So I kind of got some job security out of the deal.
Nice. And what's, I know you told a story in the past that I'd heard about, some of the things that you had implemented and, potentially considered deprecating, but, sometimes in international markets, things sort of work.
Yeah.
Can't really go on.
The infamous marquee tag is the best example. Yeah. So, Netscape came up with this blink tag early on, and there was a story, I can't remember, it might be on Wikipedia even, but it's certainly out there on the web. Lou Montulli told it. Lou Montulli worked in Netscape in the very early days. He did the Lynx browser before that. It was a text mode based browser. And he told this story about how they came up with the idea of the blink tag one night while they were out at a bar in Mountain View drinking. And one of the engineers, I forget who it was, went back to the office, coded it up, and had it ready the next morning. So they actually put it in their product. Because somebody, while they were drunk, thought, hey, let's make text blink. It'd be great. And of course, Microsoft couldn't just let that go. So they came up with the marquee tag. This is done by a program manager on the IE3 team. And marquee, basically, we had these like built-in controls where you could do all kinds of goofy stuff with text. You could like have it roll up and down. You could animate it scrolling. You could stack the letters like a Broadway marquee kind of style. And so they plugged this in and they just like enabled all these features in an HTML tag called marquee and shipped it. And this is like the worst, gaudiest thing you could possibly imagine. It was such a bad idea. And it was just, this is super early in the web, right? Like it's Wild West. Like nobody's actually saying no to anything, which is not a problem. But so they shipped it. And, eventually we get around to realizing this isn't great. This is kind of not the best idea. And we couldn't remove it out of Internet Explorer for many, many years. In fact, I'm not even sure if it's totally removed today, because the Korean market actually used it, because you could use it with standard Korean fonts to get Korean text oriented correctly. Like you could visually display it on a page. And this was way back when, before you had text direction and all of the rich.
Cool. It'll come back. Hopefully he'll come back. He'll come back.
And sideways, things like Japanese, right? And so what you do is you basically just type out your Japanese text. All the glyphs are sideways. So you kind of like turn your monitor on its side to do this. And then you print it. And, you just print it in landscape if you want portrait mode. And everything's rotated sideways, but it still worked, which is why a lot of those early Japanese fonts or Korean fonts and various other ones, all the glyphs are sideways because they were designed rotated 90 degrees. And this all kind of fell apart, of course, when we started doing international fonts for real. But yeah, they figured it out eventually.
Wow. And, again, I think I mentioned this to the audience. I find like some of these gems, these stories are always kind of tucked away, with the people who are in the room. And some of these very people who are in the room are always sort of like active or around. They're like, whatever, I don't have a Twitter account and stuff. But I was delighted to have been able to catch you at Chrome Dev Summit that one time. And then, just sort of like listen to your talks. And if anyone's ever familiar or curious, pardon me, Chris has a bunch of talks on YouTube, like Chrome University talks. I think those are the ones where you sort of like onboard interns, right? Is that it?
Yeah. So we have this series called Chrome University. We run it once or twice a year, and it is a whole lot of information, like background for new Chromium engineers, not just Google Chrome people, but anybody working on Chromium. So it's an interesting series to look. And a couple of them are the history of something, the history of Chrome. There's one on and I did a talk called The History of the Web that I've done, I think 3 times now. And every time I feel like it gets a little bit better. So I'm happiest with the last one. But we started releasing these on YouTube. So they're actually available and out there. And it has a good, 45 minutes of me telling stories like that. And a lot of it is, my personal experience, of course, not a balanced web history. So,
yeah. But there's still fantastic listens, So if anyone's curious out there, you can go look that up, Chrome University History of the Web, and you'll likely see Mr. Wilson. That said, Mr. Wilson, Chris, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Oh, by all means, I reached out to Chris like 48 hours ago. I'm like, dude, I'm so sorry. Can I speak to you? And this is time sensitive. And he agreed. So I really appreciate you taking your time. And I understand you have to go places as well. So I won't keep you too long. For everyone who's still in the chat, thank you very much for joining us. I think this was very YOLO in this sort of like organization. I'm not your favorite PM. I know that. But I think it was interesting. I'm going to do this again next year. It'll be a bit more organized this time. Yeah, that's really it. Thank you again. I'm going to edit this recording in a way that makes it look smooth. And I'll put that out hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you, the whole team at Oddbird, Miriam, Stacy. Thank you, everyone who participated. Shout outs to Alex G, Christian, Stephanie. You guys did amazing because, again, I would not have been able to get this done. I would have failed for sure. And that's really it. So TGIF, everyone, have yourself a great afternoon, a fantastic weekend. And I don't know what else to say. Anyone else wants to chime in on something? Lynn, Miriam, Stacy?
Have a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. See you all. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. All right, then. And with that, I bid everyone an adieu, and I'll catch you back on Twitter, I guess. All right. Cheers.